Hello and welcome to the Radio Academy podcast. I'm Laura Rawlings. Today we're hearing from Kevin and two Daves, which does sound a bit like a sitcom, doesn't it? Listeners to the Dave Berry Breakfast Show have just had the chance to pitch their own radio station, Absolute Radio U. Now, it's the second time the team's run this competition, and a chap called Kevin, who works at a theme park, suggested an idea that beat hundreds of other entries, and Absolute Radio Kevin was born. Here's the big reveal.
The winner of Absolute Radio U is Absolute Radio Kevin! You get it! Absolute Radio debut! Kevin, you've got your own radio station!
Oh, wow.
How are you feeling, Kevin?
The Britney threw me.
He lost at that point.
Kevin, your radio station, Absolute Radio debut, is going to become a reality. Let me ask you once again, now it's sinking in, how are you feeling?
Wow, amazed. Lost the word. Thank you. Wow.
Are you going to talk more than this when the radio station launches, Kevin?
It's very, very rare I'm lost the word.
Thankfully, the power of speech returned. And from the 10th to the 20th of February, Absolute Radio Kevin, aka Absolute Radio debut, hit the airwaves. But I wonder, what made Kevin press send?
So I've been a listener to Absolute Radio for years now, and I've always kind of felt that I'm part of everything that goes on when there's competitions, when there's text messages in. I've always dropped a message in or even tried to get involved. So when this one came up last year, I thought, oh my God, I should have entered it, because I had this idea last year, and obviously Radio Natalie was a superb winner. So when it came round this year, I thought, I'm going to do it. I've got this idea about debuts. And I was listening every day thinking, no one's come up with this idea yet. Why not? And then I was in a meeting at work, on a Teams meeting, and I wasn't really paying attention. Instead, I was thinking about, if I was going to make my radio station, what was I going to do? And that's what I entered. So I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to put through my idea of debuts and see where we go. So when it first started, oh my God, I don't think I've ever been as popular. Everyone was just like messaging me and emailing me going, did you know you're on the radio? Have you heard yourself? And I just thought, crikey, people I haven't spoken to for years were getting in touch, and it was such a really surreal experience. It was bizarre. It's been fantastic. I'm not going to lie, I'm still dining out on it now. So I did a presentation to a lot of senior people in our business yesterday, and the first bit was a little bit about me, and it was telling everyone that I had a show on Absolute Radio. So I'm going to continue to do that for as long as I can until it runs out of steam. It's been such good fun.
I love that. And it sounds like the best use of a Teams meeting, just dreaming up your own radio station. So how did the team make it happen? How did they transform Kevin from guest relations manager at Chessington World of Adventures into a music producer, presenter and interviewer? Dave Murphy is a producer on the Dave Berry Breakfast Show, and he had the job of helping put the station together and working with Kevin. So let's go back to where it started.
Well, the idea came from the superior Dave on the show, Dave Berry. It all came from his mind a couple of years back. So we started this in 2022 with another listener called Natalie. And Dave's idea was, obviously at Absolute Radio, we have loads of different stations, loads of different playlists. Our breakfast show goes out across multiple different stations simultaneously. So we go out across Absolute Radio 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, 10s, classic rock and country. And so Dave thought a fun way to sort of mix that up was to throw in another station to the mix that's entirely listener focused and completely comes from a listener's mind, presented, produced, music scheduled all by a listener. And so we sort of set about making that happen. Thankfully, we have bosses here at Absolute who are a bit amenable to those sort of strange ideas. And so we've got the license to go ahead and try and make it happen.
What did you think it was going to be like when he had this idea? And is that how it's turned out?
Honestly, it's so hard to visualise what the station is going to turn out like. We've done two now. So we've done Absolute Radio Natalie, where real sing-alongs matter. And then Absolute Radio Kevin was the latest, which is where debut songs matter. And both are entirely different experiences. So I sat in the studio with both of those individuals and recorded their station, helped them build it, helped produce it. Both came up with such different stations, and the whole recording experience itself was completely different between the two of them. I'd say it sort of, on both occasions, completely exceeded expectations. How creative our listeners can be, how they could very easily put us out of a job because they were so good at creating their own radio station and presenting it, and how quickly they took to it. Obviously, we only really gave them a day. They had sort of planning beforehand where they could sort of come up with ideas and come up with the music, of course, but they had the day to record it, and so they had a day to become a radio presenter, and it was brilliant to just sort of watch that in action and see the passion of our listeners coming through in the most unusual way.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpick from this, Dave. So just to rewind a tiny little bit,
course, yeah.
What was it that made Kevin's idea stand out? Give us a sense of how many people applied and wanted their own station.
So it's probably one of the most popular things that we've ever done.
Really?
It's amazing the amount of people that got in touch. I don't actually have the number off the top of my head, but it sort of comes out into a spreadsheet, and it was a very full spreadsheet. A lot of different ideas. Obviously, sometimes people sort of have similar ideas. Mm-hmm. So it all comes down to then the way they've pitched it, which is what sort of draws you to them. And Kevin just showed so much passion. He showed a good knowledge of the kind of music that he wanted to do. He seemed to know a lot about debuts, but the way he painted the picture of, I want to create a station that takes people back to the first moment that they first heard the song by their favourite band, and the sort of nostalgia picture painting that he did in his entry made us just think, we've got to get this guy on air and we've got to see what he's like.
I mean, it is a really good idea for a station, isn't it, to play debuts? Absolutely. Okay, but I'm guessing it also has to align with Absolute as a brand and what the breakfast show stands for as well. So you couldn't have something that was way out there, as fun as that might be, that you also want something that kind of fits with what you're like anyway.
So there's sort of two schools of thought on it, really. But we were, again, like I sort of mentioned before, we've got a team here and bosses here that were quite amenable to just making this project the best that it could be. And so we were given a bit more of a license to loosen the parameters on this a little bit. It didn't have to be something that would sit really well within the existing Absolute Radio family. Obviously, that's a bonus if it does, but if somebody came up with a really good pitch for pop disco stuff that you might not hear ordinarily on Absolute Radio, if it was a great idea and a great pitch, and somebody that sounded like they were going to do a great job of presenting their own radio station, then that would have won. So we weren't overly restrictive on the sort of music. The only real restriction that we kind of played with is trying to sort of map it out as producers, and as the music team here as well sort of did it as music schedulers. How realistic is the idea in terms of, does it have the scope? Because some of them were just silly, like some of them were just, I just want this song on repeat 24/7, and obviously as a funny joke it's great, but that would get dull after an hour.
But it needed to be a music idea, though.
It certainly needed to be music, realistically. I mean, you could go down a speech programming route, but for us that just felt like it was a big ask for a listener with no presenting experience to then come on and do a 24/7 broadcast of speech programming. The logistics of that just wouldn't work.
Unless you kind of sat in a pub for half of the time, and then it might take, some of the hours might fly. So let's talk about how it all happened then. So as you say, you're very much working on the production side, and you said you just had one day. So this is nuts. So Kevin finds out he's going to be having his own radio station. So how many hours of on air were you trying to create with that? And then we'll go back to how you did it.
So again, this sort of takes us back into the previous year with Natalie. Back then, the idea was to kind of create a roughly 4-hour broadcast that would play on a loop. Natalie was so great that we ended up with 5 hours worth of content by the end of it, because she kind of over-delivered on all the stuff that we wanted from her. That's how that one worked, and so that we kind of had that vague, we want this many hours and we need these sort of structural parts to put that together and then loop it. Kevin was a slightly different beast. It was built in a different way. We have Absolute Radio Premium here, which is the premium service which has bonus stations with no ad breaks. This was built in the same way that our premium offerings are built. From a technical point of view, it wasn't just the same 4 or 5 hour loop. It was a full batch of songs that Kevin has picked, and then our music team have also helped him curate. So we had a massive playlist to play with, and then the system will pull in links in different places. And so you'll never hear the same sort of 4-hour loop. It picks links out and will mix it all up. So it wasn't just one 4-hour loop that went over and over and over again. You'd always get sort of a slightly more fresh listen. Even though some of the links would repeat, they wouldn't come up in the same order and wouldn't go into the same songs.
When it came to what to record with him, so you've got your studio day, he comes into where you are?
He does,
and this is the first time. Okay, so he's not done anything like this before. How are you putting him at ease, and what are you getting him to record? Have you got a list of the songs and you're thinking, right, Kevin, work your magic and write a link that's going to work well there?
So interestingly, with the sort of logistics of how the station works, we did very few links that went into specific songs, because that link could appear 2 or 3 times a day and go into a different song. The links then became a little bit more like they are on The Breakfast Show, where we don't necessarily tease into a specific song. We do something more content-led that will sit nicely going into that song. Kevin and I were talking before he came down quite extensively about the sort of stories that he could bring to air, members of his friends and family that he might like to have a call with, and if they've got a funny story about him. We generally sort of had debuts as the overarching theme, so his calls with friends and family are like the first time they met him or the first time they did something together as a sort of fun story, and some really good stuff came out of that. His friends and family really delivered. And then we did do some music specific stuff of some of his favourite tunes, and he went through the nostalgia of when he first heard them. And then the other big thing that we did was just getting him involved with everybody else that's at Absolute Radio, because a big part of winning this prize was becoming part of the family here. So we recorded a few links with Breakfast, where he played some of the regular features that we do on Breakfast. And then obviously he's here all day, so by the other end of the day then Bush and Richie are here, and he could do a couple of links with Bush and Richie, which was great. And so we recorded a few bits with them. We had Jay Lawrence in, and they recorded a Through the Decades, so they went through Kevin's favourite debut songs from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and we went through all the decades with him.
That's nice.
He did a little bit with Leona, so he sort of had at least one link with most of the other presenters too. We got a lot of content out of him. Yeah,
it's interesting how you, like you say, a limited amount of time, but you're slicing it into different parts of the programme pie.
Yes,
and the sort of mindset that's required to do that as well. That's really, really interesting. And the technology, I can't even begin to understand what technology drops in whichever link where and then rotates the tracks.
I produced it and I still don't understand how that technology works. It's quite incredible the way it works. But I mean, the one thing that impressed me the most about it is just how well Kevin took to it. It's such a baptism of fire to be put in a cab and come down to the Absolute Radio studios. You know you've got to build your own show, and the first thing that he did, because of obviously the time of day that he comes in, the first thing he did was record his stuff with Breakfast, which
is the big one.
Yeah, and it made sense at the time, because obviously he's had the most FaceTime with Dave and the team. He's spoken to them on the phone. He's entered through the Breakfast Show, so it kind of made sense that was his way in. But again, like, that's quite an intense record. So to arrive at this building, having never met anybody, never done any radio before, and then to come into this studio and sit with Dave Berry, Matt Dyson, Glenn and Emma, and have a whole production team around you, and just sort of been asked to perform straight away, it must be really daunting, and he took to it brilliantly.
This is Absolute Radio Kevin, where debut songs matter. And as I'm bringing you all the best debut music, it's only fair that I share with you some of my debuts and first times. And this, for me, brings back painful memories. It's the first time that I took my son on my own to the barber's. He had beautiful long blonde hair. I'd been given the responsibility of just a quick tidy up ahead of our holiday. As the barber was cutting his hair, I was on my phone. And I never noticed him taking a grade 1 to his hair and giving him an absolute skinhead all over. Absolute panic. I rung my wife and told her I've done something very, very bad. Arthur, I'm sorry. So this one goes out to my formerly bald son, Arthur. This song is just for you.
One of the other things that I just want to pick up on that you mentioned, you said about one of the differences between the last year, Radio Natalie, and this year, Radio Kevin, is that you've got the premium model, haven't you? And so this is where I'm guessing you were part of this then was perhaps to encourage people to sign up to that. Mm-hmm. We've got Radio Kevin, and if you sign up to this, you can get a little trial with the hope that they'll also stay and continue with the subscription, right?
Yeah, so we never really wanted that to be the
not
forefront
foremost,
messaging.
obviously, but yeah.
Obviously, the way we did it with Kevin was available to anybody for, I believe it was 2 weeks we had Kevin, or it might have been a week and a bit. He got 2 weekends in, at least, of Absolute Radio. Kevin is available for all. And then he graduated to the Absolute Radio Premium service. And I believe he is still there, available to listen to if you sign up to Premium.
I don't know if this is your domain, but do you know much about the kind of take-up? Do these sorts of initiatives help with that?
It isn't my domain, I'm afraid, so I don't really have the figures on it. I would imagine it does, just even from the sort of basic maths of it gets a few more on-air mentions. The original take-up for Kevin, when we first put it out there for everybody, was huge. It was great to see just how many people were enthusiastic about it, and less about the numbers, more about the social reaction and the stuff that was coming off the text machine the next day. It was great to see real people reacting to this person that's never done radio before suddenly broadcasting his own station.
But it's someone like them, and that's the thing, isn't it? Someone like them, and everyone has got a first listen to a track. 100%. We can all relate to that, can't we? So in terms of what you learnt from this, any advice you might pass on to someone else? What have you picked up along the way?
I think one of the biggest things that I would say as a piece of advice, it's a little cheesy, but trust your listeners and trust the people that are getting involved, because obviously when you put this out there and you're looking for a great idea of a great station, and somebody's little web entry where they've kind of written 100 words about what they think, what their pitch is for a radio station, you might look at that and just be like, I don't know what they're going to be like. Are they going to be able to manage the workload of creating their own radio station in a day? Yeah. Are they going to have the charisma to sort of carry that off? And I think the big lesson learned from this is just trust that they will, because the people that are making the effort to get involved and putting themselves forward, putting themselves out there, have come up with a great idea. They're going to be the best people to sell it. And you've just got to, like, having the faith in the fact that Kevin had never done anything to do with radio. We had never heard him sort of doing radio before, but we still put him in a cab, had him arrive at this building and trusted that he would make a great radio station. And he did. So, yeah, keep the faith is the best bit of advice I could give.
And trust Breakfast Show Dave's ideas.
100%. When Dave Berry comes up with an idea that sounds mad but brilliant, it is 100% brilliant. Trust it and go with it, yes.
And last question, Dave, will you do this again? Are we going to have another one next year?
I sincerely hope so. It would be great to do it again. Obviously, this is the second year we've done it now. Both years have been brilliant in different ways and have been such a great success and such a joy to create. It would be a shame to put that to bed now. So it'd be lovely to do it again, but also interesting to kind of take on the challenge of adding a new twist, because we've always got to develop it and build it. So it'd be interesting to sort of go back to the drawing board and see what more we can do to eke a little bit more out of it.
Always coming up with fresh ideas, and Radio Debuts is a particularly good one. Thank you so much, Dave Murphy. Since we recorded that together, Absolute Radio Natalie, which is the forerunner to Absolute Radio Kevin, has made it to the ARIA's shortlist, so congratulations to the team. If you haven't already, you can see the full list of who's been nominated in all the other categories at the Radio Academy website and on social media. And don't forget, there is still just about time to vote for your Radio Times Moment of the Year, but don't dilly-dally. Until next week.